So moving on, we've got our next guest speaker, Gareth. Gareth, are you there?
I am here.
Oh, fantastic. Can we all hear Gareth okay? Cool. All right. So Gareth is, how did I meet Gareth? This is back in 2007. I got a job at a company called KiwiPlan, which is very near my house. I literally can cycle to work, which is very rare. And Gareth was the development manager at KiwiPlan. I was one of the Java developers in his team. And fast track, probably 13 years later, I got a random message on LinkedIn from a guy, what's his name? Josh. Yes, Josh Cronin. Oh, yeah, someone. And he asked me, because at the time I was working for an Australian insurance company as an architect, and he asked me, are you interested in hearing about our fantastic new product, Ambit? And I said, who? And then I went online and checked it out, and Gareth is apparently the CTO and co-founder. So that's why I agreed to have a chat with Josh. And that's how I, again, got back in touch with Gareth. So Gareth has been in the industry for many, many years, more than 20 years. He's been vice president of engineering for, I could be wrong, with Orion Health, KiwiPlan, and now executive manager at Xero. So a lot of experience in the corporate world, in big software product companies, and then at the same time, he has a lot of startup experience. I wonder how he managed to do all that. So here we go, over to Gareth.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. I should probably tell you how I managed to do all that, or how those steps fitted together. I thought this was a really interesting topic that Roy came up with, which was this kind of journey from tech worker to tech founder. And the bit that I inserted was the if, because I think that's another really important question, is the if and when, because starting a startup sounds pretty cool, and the press would like you to believe it's really cool, but it's also, there's some other things about it that you need to know too, and to think about. Particularly, I'm assuming I'm talking here largely to people who are working hands-on in the tech industry, and so that's the kind of angle I'm taking here, is basically explaining what I reckon are the things you need to consider if you're thinking about leaping into being a co-founder or a founder. But generally speaking, it's better to be a co-founder than a founder. It's hard work, and you wouldn't want to do it by yourself unless you're a very brave person. I'm certainly not that brave. And then a little, once we've gone over that, so we've got to the point where we're like, okay, I hear you, but I'm still very interested in being a co-founder. We'll talk a little bit about what I reckon are the kind of the hows, like how you can prepare from being a technology practitioner into being a co-founder. So I'll just jump onto the next slide there. So what I'll do is we'll talk about what a startup is anyway, because I think people have different ideas about that, and I'm using a particular definition, and so I'll talk a little bit about that. And then this if, and then we'll talk about some of those skills, and the areas that I want to touch on are skills and knowledge. So that's a really important part of it. Co-founders, which is an equally important part of it. Money, because everyone always wonders about that. It's like, well, how do you actually get the money? Like, where does that happen? And transitioning from a day job, which is something that I've had a pretty interesting journey on, moving back and forth between day job and startup. And so I'll talk a little bit about that as well, particularly in current times. As Roy mentioned, I've had a wander through quite a few different software companies, and I actually started out as I was born in Whakatane in New Zealand, and I started out as a musician and piano teacher. So that was actually the first few years after I dropped out of high school. That's what I was doing. And then I eventually got bored with that and decided I wanted to do my other love, which is technology. And I went to the University of Auckland to do computer science. And in my third year, I was fortunate to get the very first scholarship that KiwiPlan offered. And so KiwiPlan are a very low profile in New Zealand, but an amazingly successful and profitable company. It's owned by a big American company these days, but it was a great place to grow up. And one of the things that I did growing up there was, when I just before I became development manager there, was being sent to do an MBA back at the university again. So I went back, and that was great, because that gave me a lot more understanding of how business works. So And the funny thing about MBAs is they do teach you some hard skills about business, but most of it is about mindset. And it's about thinking about New Zealand's role in the world and the role of business in New Zealand and New Zealand's place in that from a global perspective. And that's what made me want to go to Orion Health. So I led development in Orion Health, going from a team of about 150 people up to 400 people over a very short period of time, and made lots of really stupid mistakes and learned lots of exciting things. And then after I've been doing that for a while, I went to a company called Wynyard Group that no longer exists. And that was the first time that I had the experience, instead of a fast growth company, of a fast decline company. And we went all the way from being a stock market darling in New Zealand, riding the coattails of Xero, actually, in terms of IPOs, tech IPOs in New Zealand, to going into administration and then liquidation. And so one day we had 250 people working for us, and the next day we had 5. And I was one of those 5 people, and I had to help sell the products so that we could pay everyone's salary that they were owed at the end of the company. And it was a character building experience. It's not something I would recommend, but it's companies go up, companies go down. It's just like hype cycles. Same thing happens. After I left Wynyard, I consulted for a while at Vista Entertainment, the cinema software company, and Air New Zealand. Air New Zealand was my first glimpse into real corporate life, like what it's like actually being a cost center inside a company that does something else, rather than a company whose job it is to make software. And then I joined Xero at the same time as I co-founded Ambit. So Josh Comrie, who founded Potentia, the recruitment company Roy mentioned before, Josh and I had known each other for a long time, and 4 of us got together and decided to create something. And what we created was leveraging hype. So we were AI and chatbots, and the idea of conversational user interfaces was all very hot. So we did that. And Ambit still exists. It's running now. I'm a shareholder, but I no longer have a role in the company. About 18 months ago, I finished up with Ambit from an operational perspective, but I obviously still have an interest in it. And now I work at Xero 4 days a week. And on my 5th day a week, I do other stuff. And other stuff is a mixture of, I do some advising. So that logo up there is StretchSense, who I've helped out this year. But also what I do is fun technical side projects, because while my role really is having conversations like this with people and filling out spreadsheets. That's basically what an executive general manager does at Xero. The other thing that I like to do is still code. And so I make apps, I make stuff that I think are useful and fun. My last few projects is I have a hobby of making cocktails. So C Gareth C is my Instagram handle, where I post a cocktail every weekend. And I wrote an app to help me mix cocktails and manage recipes and that sort of thing. I made an app for mindfulness. I did a course where we did a whole lot of mindfulness meditation, and I thought all the mindfulness apps weren't really what I wanted. So I made my own one. And I've also built an API for getting access to data about recycling in New Zealand, because the waste stream and the way that we manage recycling in New Zealand, I find is kind of bizarre and inefficient. I'd really like someone to do something with the API, but I'm lacking a motivation at the moment on my 1 day a week of fun to go and find a partner to do that with. So I'm not really doing anything with that one at the moment. And so this is where I find myself now. So I went on this interesting journey with Ambit for almost 4 years, and that's what I'll use as my own personal examples as I make my way through this. So what is a startup? It's a really good definition there. Vision X Partners, this particular blog on their site, which is half promotion, half this kind of thing, is a really good description of the sorts of things that a startup has to do. And one of the things it has is this definition. And I think it's really important that we remember that a startup is not a services business. What I'm talking about is really tech product startups. So it might be hardware, might be software, might be a combination, but it's something where we're actually building a product of some sort. You can start a services business, you can start a small business, you can be a plumber, you can be dry cleaner, dairy, whatever, something that other people are already doing, but you think you can either do it a little bit better or just do it somewhere that it needs doing. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a great way to do things, but it's very different to the concept of a startup. So a startup is looking for something that's like miles better than anything else out there. And it's really looking to disrupt. And the reason that it's doing that is because it's generally seeking extraordinary returns for shareholders. That's normally what startups are actually trying to do. So they're trying to make more money than you normally could running a normal sort of business with a normal kind of return from it. So what I want to talk about here is the if, right? This is the if stuff. And I think there's a couple of quotes here which are really, really worth thinking about very, very hard if you're thinking about starting a startup. And the one that I want to point to in particular is that if your main motivator is money, you're probably better off focusing on a career in a Fortune 500 company. Now, it doesn't have to be a Fortune 500 company, to be honest. It could be any established, profitable company that really cares about sharing a bit of wealth with its senior members. So I'm very lucky. I've been at Xero almost 5 years now. And in that time, I've been part of a long-term incentive scheme, because that's what companies like Xero do, where they're well established. And what that means is that they share equity with you. They give you a few shares when you start, kind of thing, and they build up over time. I've got more money out of those because of a bit of good luck in terms of timing when I joined Xero and what's happened subsequently than I would ever have possibly gotten out of Ambit. And that's from doing a very ordinary kind of day job. So if someone said to me, would you start a chatbot startup, or would you work for a company like Xero? Because my goal is to have, pay off my mortgage and feel a degree of financial independence. I'd say, well, you should work for Xero. Don't start a startup. And the reason is that while you're, like it says there, your chances of becoming a millionaire are so much higher in a normal job when you're in a senior position than a startup. But your chances of becoming a billionaire are almost nothing. There's no way that an established company is going to share enough equity with you to become a billionaire unless something very, very strange happens. So an important thing, despite all that press, and I've chucked a whole lot of TechCrunch headlines up there, right, where they're talking about, it's money, isn't this exciting startup, so much money flowing through. That money doesn't find its way into the hands of co-founders until after a very long time, and the odds of success, of getting to that level of success, are very, very, very low. And then the other thing that's really important to bear in mind, and I do have some personal stories about this one, because I think I made some big mistakes here in terms of what I chose to do when we started Ambit, is about purpose and time frame. So when I started that company, I was thinking, I should be out of this in about 3 years. Should be able to exit. We'll sell this to someone. They'll give us a whole bunch of money. We'll take our money and then we can go do the next thing. That'll be great. And I was thinking, I want to solve an interesting technical problem. So when we did our sort of ideation of, what should we do? Because we were like, we're going to make a business, but we know what it is. We decided that we would do the chatbot thing because it seemed kind of interesting and it was kind of hot in terms of hype cycle. That's not a good reason to start a startup. One of the reasons that that's not a good reason is because that's not, the length of a startup is not 3 years. It's more like 10. You really need to be in there for 10 years to do anything of significance, which means that you need to be doing something you honestly believe in. And when I started Ambit, I was like, yeah, these chatbots are okay, but they sort of seem like a bit of a crock. And I'm not really sure that AI is really going to do much in the next few years anyway. It feels like it's kind of being way overhyped, and I can see it's got some useful stuff. But what we started out with, which was building a platform, kind of low code platform, that's not going to go very far. We don't really have the resources to do that. What a terrible way to start a business, right? That's not a good purpose. What you want to do is something that you're so excited about that every time someone asks you about it, you can't stop talking about it. Like you're a huge bore, basically. You're the person at the party who everyone's trying to avoid because they know you're just going to start talking about your business and how freaking awesome it is and how everyone's going to be using it and it's going to be so useful and things. So it's got to be that kind of level of purpose sitting behind something that you want to do if you want to really co-found a startup and have a good time. The other thing you have to really, really be wary of, and this is something I again went into this thinking, this is great. I'll just be doing fun technical stuff all day, but for a job, what a cool thing to do. And then I'll walk away with some money after a few years. Most of what you do is not fun technical stuff, even as a technical co-founder. So I was the technical guy, right? There was 3 of us. One of us did operations, one did CEO type stuff, and one did technical stuff. And we pretty much divided it that way. And I just wanted to do the technical stuff. But the reality is, and the photos I've scattered around here, a lot of what you're going to be doing is very much what you saw James doing today. That would be 90% of what most co-founders would be doing most of the time. So pitching their product, their reason, their vision, like where they fit into the world, how important it's going to be, and all that sort of thing, either to customers, that's the most useful thing co-founders do, because customers trust co-founders. They just have a magical aura because they were there at the very beginning, and it appears like they're very trustworthy and committed. Or to pitching to investors, because often you're looking for money. And so you're talking to people to give them confidence. And even when you've got that money, you still have to keep talking to them and telling them what you're up to and giving them that confidence that you know what you're actually doing and that there's big, exciting things ahead. And then there's an awful lot of things like posting on social media, like just making noise, making sure that you're well connected, that you're turning up to events and conferences and talking about it even more. And then a lot of it is really making sure that as your startup grows, you've got a team and you have to do all the things that I do day to day in my day job at Xero, which is worrying about how engaged people are and what's going on in their careers and what's going to happen next and where I'm going to find more of them and how we keep them even when they're in markets like it is at the moment and all of those kinds of things. And so that actually leaves very little room as a technical co-founder for doing the technical stuff. First, like 6 months or a year, sure, lots of technical stuff, but it rapidly disappears as all these other aspects of the business become more important. And one of the things that I wish I had done more when I was working at Ambit was engaging much more in the sales process, because whenever I did, it helped us a lot because I could talk to the technical teams within our customers, because it was enterprise software, and talk to them in their own language and help them with their own roadmaps and their own needs and all of those sorts of things as well. And so, going into it thinking it's going to be like your side hustle, side project like I do on Fridays, but 5 days a week, doesn't work like that. Okay, so that's all bad stuff, right? That's like, think very carefully before you decide to rush off and do something like this. Make sure it's something you believe in. I really think that if you want to take anything away from tonight, it's like, just make sure it's something you honestly believe is the coolest thing that everyone should use or every business should use, however your startup works. Make sure it's something like that, because it makes the whole rest of the thing much, much easier. So if you're sitting there and you're like, oh, wow, so what, I'd have to do sales and marketing and design and all these other things? Yes, you would. And for technical co-founders, you're generally the product person as well. And product management is not what it used to be. It's a very established profession now, and there's a lot to it. And being able to talk about a product and shape a product in a way that investors are going to believe in and customers are going to believe in is a whole science of its own, but it's often one that you really need to make sure that you understand. I've given 4 of my favorite resources here in terms of skilling up. And if I was today where I was, 15 years ago, thinking, oh, this would be exciting to try being a technical co-founder in a startup of some sort, I'd be like, well, you need to be very familiar with the sorts of things that these particular sites publish. So many of you might be familiar with these already, but you've got TechCrunch there, which is just like, it used to be just Silicon Valley news, but they do a pretty good coverage these days on startup ecosystems in places like India and China and Israel, everywhere where there's interesting startup ecosystems, they give a bit of coverage to that now. It's very general purpose, but it's also a great place to find out who's funding what and where the money's kind of going, if chasing the money is what you're interested in. Firstround.com, review.firstround.com. So First Round are a VC company, but they have a fantastic publication, which includes a podcast these days as well. And it covers all the different disciplines that you need to be able to understand to run a startup type company. A16Z is Andreessen Horowitz's sort of repository of knowledge base articles and things. Fantastic for trying to understand all the things that get talked about when you find yourself in startup land. Like, what's the difference between a pre-money and a post-money valuation? What are all these revenue multiples and exit multiples, and why are they important? And what should I be thinking about? Like how do these things even get structured? Do I need to talk to a lawyer? All of those kinds of things get covered pretty well there. And then I've also included Silicon Valley Product Group there, which is Marty Kagan's consulting outfit. And that's sort of got this state of the art in terms of product science and the way that we shape products and those sorts of things these days too. So I'd be spending a lot of time reading all of that stuff before I was making my way into actually kicking something off. Then there's co-founders, and co-founders it's probably the thing that startups actually succeed or die on. Co-founders are infamously, that's why startups usually fail, is because co-founders can't agree on something, and so they choose to wind up rather than to carry on. Choosing people to work with, because obviously you're not expected to be an expert at everything. You need to do a little bit of everything, but as a technical co-founder, you're not expected to actually be the expert in absolutely everything. Finding people with complementary skills is really useful, but the complementary skills is really a small part of it. It's finding people who you can go through incredibly hard times with is actually what it's all about. And so finding a co-founder is actually more like finding someone who you want to marry not finding a business partner. It really is, and because of the sorts of things that you have to think about. So in the same way as when you're thinking about marrying someone, you ask yourself questions like, what will happen when we want children? Do you want children? How many children do you want? You almost have to ask the same questions of your co-founder, except those questions turn into more things like, if I had children and didn't want to work for 6 months, what would that mean for our company? Or if our company, we're only just sort of getting started and someone said, would you like $1 million? Do we walk away? Because if you don't have those conversations up front and you don't understand how your co-founders might respond to those situations, it's amazing how quickly those situations creep up on you, and then unexpected things happen and it all gets very unpleasant. And so you can do this in lots of different ways. I thought one of the most intriguing ones was this thing that I've posted up here, which is from First Round Review. And that is literally like a dating questionnaire that someone put together of 50 questions to ask a potential co-founder to try and assess, like how aligned are our values? How much do we care about these things? It even matters what your politics are. And so it's really good to have diverse teams and included, like diverse perspectives. But if you have different values, like you think that getting the highest possible exit price for your startup is more important than having a team of people who respect and trust you, that's not good. If one of you thinks one way and one of you thinks the other, it's going to be awfully difficult to get through the hard situations. And I've included that quote up there, which is, when everything's good, it's easy. You could have any co-founder, it doesn't really matter. But the problem is things aren't always good. They go up and down and so on. Other people's money. I just wanted to talk a little bit about this one. This is something I'm quite passionate about, and I have a perspective on it, which is probably pretty obvious in the way that I talk about this, and a particular political view on it as well. What I've put down the left-hand side there are venture capital vehicles that operate in New Zealand. So these are all people who would like to give you money. So if you were co-founding a company that looks like it's got some success, and particularly if it looks like it's actually making money or bringing money in, maybe not making money, but people are paying for something, they'll give you money to grow. But they won't give you the money for free. They'll give you money for a share in their company, in your company. So they want a share of your company. The ones in the middle are accelerators. Accelerators, they sound really cool and they have great communities and it's all really fun and exciting and everything, but they take really large chunks of your company at a very early stage in exchange for those services that they provide. The companies down the right-hand side are all famous because of the products that they've created, and they're very successful and established. They're also famous because they were all bootstrapped. So they didn't take investment capital early on. They were all built by people who slaved away for years in something they truly believed in, paying for everything themselves. So the customers paid them money for their product and they used that money to grow the business. It's a slow way to grow a business, but it's a much more solid way if what you really want to do is create a product that is going to make a real difference and a product that's really going to create a whole lot of customer value. So you don't have to take other people's money to build a startup. There's some interesting lifestyle choices in there, of course, because if you're busy slaving away and people aren't giving you much money and you're in the very early stages, then you effectively don't have much income. And walking away from income at different stages of your life can be really, really tough. And that sort of comes to my when question as well, because when you're very early in your career and you don't have a lot of financial commitments, it's a fantastic time to have a go at bootstrapping. And I would encourage anyone who's thinking about trying to create a product startup to go with bootstrapping first before starting to take other people's money. And when you take other people's money, at Ambit, our very first raise was friends and family. And it sounded weird to me at the time. I was like, oh, good God, I can't ask my friends and family to give me money. Like, that's ridiculous. They'll never do that. But it's funny how much people are willing to trust you on the basis of your relationship with them alone, and how interested they are and how willing and happy they are to take a risk on something that you're creating if you believe in it. And so, we were able to run the business for 12 months. We bootstrapped initially. We put in some money and we ran it for about 6 months off our own money, and not very much, just enough to pay a couple of contractors. And then we did a friends and family round where we basically gave a portion of the company to our friends and family who were interested in taking a risk. And that saw us through another 12 months before we had to go to the more expensive money, the money that comes with strings attached. Because the other problem with taking other people's money, not only do they want a share of your company and quite a big share, they want to tell you what to do. And if you're very, very passionate about what you're building and you were hoping that you would have a lot of say in what you were building, that rapidly erodes when you're taking other people's money, because they've got real expectations about how fast you're going to grow and how much you're going to sell and how much you're going to make. And if those expectations are things like you need to be growing revenue by 20% over the next 6 months, then you're going to make choices based on getting the revenue in the door, not on what's the best for your wonderful, amazing product that you really believe in. So that extending that period in which you get to make those choices, and if you can extend that period a really long time, like those bootstrap companies on the right, that's a really, really good way to actually build something that you believe in. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we do a few questions is part of the when, and this is the getting rid of the day job thing. And this could be quite a scary thing, or you can manage it in any way you like. And the reason that I've chosen these 3 quotes here is because you're all in a very fortunate position if you are at a stage of your career where you're thinking you might want to do something like this, but you've got a solid job, you're working for some company. It might be a very established company, it might be a more early stage company, but you want to go out on your own. Companies are pretty much bending over backwards at the moment to hang on to their tech talent. And flexible working has become a really, really significant part of how companies create value for their employees. So make their employees feel like this is a really good place to work or a really good place to go to. So the way that I did this at Xero is I worked nights and weekends during the first year of Ambit. Then I said, look, this is getting a little bit hard. Could I chop it back to 4 days a week and I'll do a day in the office at Ambit? And then I did that for about 6 months. And after that, it was still getting hard. So I chopped down to 3 days at Xero and 2 days at Ambit. And then eventually I went right down to 2 days at Xero and 3 days at Ambit. At that point, I had to change role because my role was a little bit difficult to do. In 2 days, just didn't really work. Even 3 days was getting to be a bit of a struggle. But that kind of flexibility is the sort of flexibility that tech companies will give you these days. You just need to discuss it with them. And if you're working with someone who's so rigid they refuse to do that sort of thing, then you're probably working in the wrong company. You should come and work at Xero. But that blended working, choices of spending time on things that aren't just that one primary day job, is a way that you can make a sacrifice without making a massive sacrifice. So you can give over, proper time that gives you time to be able to go and do sales calls, to be able to, run demos, to be able to spend time with a team or really do some intensive design or whatever it happens to be. You can do that and then do another job alongside it. And companies who understand the value of this realize that when they let you do those kinds of arrangements, you're learning so much in the other bit that you're bringing back into your day job, not least of which is a real appreciation for the good things that you've got in an established company, right? So at Ambit, I was going into the office where we were in a weird shared workspace with dogs running around and other companies and noise and a terrible coffee machine. And then I could go to the office at Xero and, there's 3 kitchens and a barista and espresso machine and all the comfortable furniture and all of those kinds of perks that you get with those kinds of jobs. So, you don't have to do it all or nothing. There's definitely an awful lot of flexibility, particularly now with employers in terms of mixing up how you do that. And so, if I was doing it again, I'd definitely do it. I'd stick to the bootstrapping. I'd sacrifice the pay by cutting my days down at my first job. And I would be building something that was that I really believed in. That wasn't just solving an interesting technical problem. So there we go. I went fairly quickly. I hope you got all of that. Hopefully you're thinking, okay. I thought I wanted to, but maybe not now, maybe later. But it's really important to think those things before you dive into that. Has anyone got any questions they'd like to ask? I'll pull up the chat as well.
Okay, so this time around, we switch it around. We have the online guys to ask questions first before we switch to the live audience. Okay, so if you're online and you have a question you want to ask Gareth, this is your chance. Unmute yourself, say who you are, and ask the question.
Don't be shy. It's a sign of someone who's ready to go out there and start a new startup if you're that person who's willing to ask the first question.
Let me have a look at the chat. Anyone online?
I have a question, Gareth. What's your view on incubators? I've heard some people say they're really great for like kickstarting a business at the early stage, but some people say they're just a waste of time and people that want to tell you how to do things.
Yeah, it sort of depends on the business that you're trying to create and what you're looking for. I think incubators are great particularly if it's a solo founder, like someone who's really doesn't want to try the co-founder thing and wants to give it a go themselves. I think that's a fantastic environment because you're basically trading off a chunk of equity in your company, which the incubator will cheerfully take, in exchange for a community of people who are all trying to do the same thing. And so I think, as far as creating an instant community, that's actually a pretty cool way of doing things. And for people who really don't have terribly much experience, like they really feel like they're missing a lot of the key skills that they're going to need to be able to do that. I think for anyone who's a little bit further on in their career, so they've maybe got 10 years experience under their belt, it's a bit of a waste because you've probably got way more experience and knowledge from another company than an incubator is really going to be able to offer you. So you're actually making for that community, whereas you can get that community for free just by getting out there and using your own network and all that sort of thing. Am I involved with the blockchain? Yeah. So when I was saying we were riffing on ideas for companies, and I was like, AI, yeah, sounds interesting, I'll give that a go. Blockchain was one of the other things that, crypto in general, but yeah, it was blockchain in particular at that point. So Josh, co-founder Josh, who's a good friend of mine still, he was really keen to do something with blockchain as well. We really wanted to do blockchain and AI. But I think his motivations, also very questionable, were that he wanted to be able to talk about cool stuff on stage at events. And so he was our go to events and talk about cool stuff guy. So he very quickly schooled himself in enough about AI to be able to talk at a conference, which you don't have to have terribly much depth of technical understanding to be able to do that. But he really wanted to talk about blockchain too. And he was very disappointed that I refused to have anything to do with blockchain because I felt we would, one, lose focus, but also all the people who I knew at that stage. And I must say, James gave a very good explanation before, and it all sounds like it's matured an awful lot since I was looking at it, with some pretty sketchy people I knew who were involved in crypto at that stage. So it was all very much the encouraging speculation and telling the weird story of kind of counterculture alt currency as if that's the thing that's driving the whole thing. And that didn't make a lot of sense to me because philosophically, I think people have a faith in institutions, and that's just a human thing, you want to have an institution that you can trust. And when you take away the institution, it causes a lot of other problems. And the particular problem they were trying to solve at that stage with cryptocurrencies was really running against what I felt was just something that wouldn't work. So we shied away from it. I must say, very early on when IBM on their cloud first did, I think they were the first ones to have like the blockchain as a service. I stood one up and stuck a couple of transactions in the ledger and went, okay, I don't know what to do now. And so it still felt like that kind of solution looking for a problem, which it sounds like it might be maybe starting to get past that. I hope so. Anyway. Start a business with family. Oh yeah, it's a really good idea to start business with family. I'm often quite envious of, in my job at Xero, I often interview customers. So all our customers are small business customers, and we have a thing with the product leadership team where we jump on calls to learn more by just talking to ordinary customers of Xero about their businesses. It's one of my favorite things to do. It's so interesting. You talk to so many people doing interesting things. I'm always very, very jealous of the people who've got family businesses behind them, because what better place to ensure that you understand each other's values, and there's almost an inescapable trust that you just have to have between family members, in certain families, of course. As my sister, who's a lawyer, often points out to me, if you go through the court listings each day in the civil court for people suing each other, often the surnames are the same on the cases, and that's family members falling out with each other. So it doesn't mean it's absolutely magically going to work, But I think that's a really good starting point is family. If my siblings had a slightly different set of skills between us, I think that's something I'd seriously consider. Yeah. Right. Let me have manage risk for startups. Oh yeah. Well, this is something you talk about all the time. So you know, in a company, like a kind of good practice in a company is to have a board, and the board provide governance, and one of the functions of governance is to govern risk. And so at Ambit, we set up a board quite early, actually, which was the three of us co-founders, and then we added a couple of our investors later, and then it sort of evolved over time. I'll be honest, I'm not a massive fan of governance, and I think it's often put in way too early in startups. It just kind of slows you down. But the way that risk can best be managed, I think, is where it's an open discussion and everyone's talking about it all the time. So we had a risk register. We tried to do a big fancy one. It didn't really work. But what we had was just a Google sheet with a list of what we felt like were our top risks, and we would revisit those at each board meeting. And so that's a way to just, in a simple way, kickstart a discussion of anything that we're particularly concerned about, or go, well, is there anything new, like anything that we should be worried about? So for example, one of the ones I introduced was when there was a real rash of cyber attacks. Like there were some really bad exploits that happened a few years back, and it sort of happened again recently. But that risk of cyber attack and what that would do in terms of reputational risk for customers and all that sort of thing. And so that just sort of, you know, you then make a bit of a plan, but having a regular check-in of some sort, and maybe that's a board meeting and it's an official artifact that gets trotted out for each board meeting, or maybe it's slightly less formal than that, but it's your management meeting once a month with the co-founders or whatever. That's generally how we would manage risk. One of the good things about having worked in established companies for a long time is you've usually got some cool stuff from your company that you can use as a starting point, and it never needs to be quite as detailed as an established company's, or especially a public company's risk register, but you've at least got like the high level sort of starting points for those kinds of things. And new problem opportunity. Okay, how do you choose whether to escalate and delegate? The Sierpinski triangle fractal of recursive self-sacrifice, scale infinitely. You know, well, I probably can't answer that part of the question, but I can certainly answer the first part of the question. Yeah, I could talk forever on kind of my personal philosophies on leadership and escalation and delegation, but I think that would be a subject for another day. One of the interesting things about building a startup is, and a team from scratch, is you get to use all the things that you've learned over a really long period of time and then kind of try them for real. And one of the things that I did very early on was to put in the people practices that I'd seen at various companies, and Xero's particularly good at a lot of these, in terms of always making sure you're managing engagement, that one-on-ones are regular and happening, that career paths are clear, and all of those kinds of things, which is often neglected in startups. And the problem is, if you leave that too long, things get into a really difficult place, and you can end up with very sort of toxic team cultures and things. Cool.
Anything else online? Or we'll move to some live audience questions. Is that okay, Gareth?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, anyone open up the floor? Anyone like to ask a question? Yeah. You might have to speak to that speaker a little bit. Yeah. Okay, that's where your voice will come from.
All right, Gareth, I just got a question about, say, market research. So when we got a say opportunity or idea, and how do we identify, all right, it's an own and solved problem, and if we were, say, we did quite well, it's gonna be like a big, say, we would be like successful, or yeah, how to identify that? Gonna be like it's gonna be a big thing over there.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. It's an interesting question. Okay. I think the thing that's really important to know is that when you go and commission very expensive market research, so you pay an agency to do it for you, they do the same thing that you could do yourself. They pretty much hit Google, and they will they have resources to be able to go and do interviews and things like that, if they want to do that. But the fact is that desk research makes up a lot of how people get that kind of market intelligence. So if you start from Googling for companies in the space, and then you sort of find a few companies and you start searching for competitors of those companies, and you look at their investors and you look at what else they've got in their portfolio, you basically just sort of crawl your way across the web looking for everything in that space that kind of makes sense. A lot of companies put up quite expensive analyst reports for free if you register your interest with their particular company. So the way that the research companies, so I'm talking about like Forrester and Gartner and companies like that, they have a lot of this sort of information they collect. The way that they work is a company commissions them to do research on the space that that company is in. So it's kind of like it's a little bit shifty, right? It's sort of like you pay someone to do some research on you and your competitors, and it's allegedly independent, but you're actually paying for it. And when you pay for it, they give you the published report, and you've got the right to redistribute it. So often you find that very expensive reports that, as a startup, there's no way you're going to go and drop $5,000 or $10,000 on a single report. They'll actually be sitting on company websites on their lead generation. So that you put in your email address, forever being spammed by these people in the future. And in return, you get this very expensive PDF that tells you about all the competitors in that space and where they've decided they rank, and all of those kinds of things. What I did a lot of from competitive research perspective is I had a domain that I didn't really care too much about, like one of my domains I've registered, and I just used an email address on that, and I would go into every lead gen, every demo, everything, every register for everything, all the spam and everything, all go to this repository. And then I kept a Google Sheet of like a categorization of all the companies in the space, and which ones I thought were interesting and how I thought they were positioning, and where the kind of the white space is. This is all kind of product management stuff. So when I was talking about Silicon Valley Product Group before, and product marketing and positioning, that's the sort of stuff that you can read about to learn how to assess those things. So I think you can go a really long way with desk research without worrying that there's some kind of magical market research that you're missing out on that someone else is getting access to. I don't think that's true. But also remember that if you believe in something, like if it's something you honestly believe you've got something that you really want to build, you can outlast competitors, because they will, if they're not believing in it, they'll kind of give up, or they often pivot. There's a lot of pivoting in startups. When we started at Ambit, the very first time I went through all those competitors, by the time I left, at least a quarter of them had changed their entire business. Like some of them weren't even doing chatbot type stuff anymore. Some of them become kind of general AI. Some of them had specialized in one vertical, all of that kind of thing. So if you've got conviction, like if this is something that you really want to do, and you have to do your own pivoting as well. Like if you spot an opportunity, you might move there, but believing in it, it puts you in a good place. That some of the most successful companies are the ones that enter the most competitive markets. Like it's not something to be scared of. When there's a lot of competition, that means someone's already validated it for you. It means people are willing to pay money for it. So that's, it's good.
Cool, thanks, Gareth. Should we take one more question from the audience? Just conscious of the time. Anyone? This is okay. Ben, if you want to come closer to the.
Hi, Gary. I want to ask a question. You mentioned about you had some tough time when you co-founded Xero. My question is, during that tough time, how do you keep yourself motivated and go through that time? Thank you.
Yeah, keeping yourself motivated. Well, there's lots of ways to keep yourself motivated. This is one of the things. I've just been interviewing for a job in my team. And when I asked the question, what are the biggest challenges that you think there are in people leadership, the common answer to that is trying to understand everyone's motivations, because everyone has different motivations. They've all got, different things that make them tick. And learning what motivates yourself, that is the key to staying motivated. I talk about it as managing energy. So it's actually categorizing the things that you do every day. So there's stuff like stuff I did at Xero every day. There was stuff that I was doing at Ambit every day. Some things would bring my energy up. Some things would kind of use it up, bring it down again. And so you've actually got to have a conscious sense of the things that perk you up and the things that bring you down. And you have to plan your day to have enough of the perking you up stuff to counter the stuff that brings you down. And so for me, a lot of that was making sure that I still did play a large role in the technical contribution. So I was effectively the architect, but I had to give away a lot of the coding stuff, because if I'd been doing all the hands-on coding when I already had a team of, like 7 developers, that's kind of annoying for them because I'm not doing it all the time. So I'll block, but also it's not going to be good for my own motivation, because I'm going to feel like I'm dragging behind all the time. I'm not finishing my tasks. I'm not available. So, but I know that to keep me motivated, I need to be able to make that direct technical contribution. So then there was just a matter of making sure we were doing enough kind of, whiteboard sessions and that kind of thing, where I could actually participate actively to keep myself motivated. But don't get me wrong, it's there's always tough stuff that comes along, and there's lots and lots of different ways that you can do that. But it really depends on you and your own motivations and what gets you out of bed in the morning. You're just going to make sure you're managing the right amount of those things, and getting plenty of sleep, exercise, and eating properly, because those are the other things that actually do make a massive difference to how you feel about how your work is going when it's tough.
Cool, thanks, Gareth. One last question before we wrap it up for the live audience. This is your chance. If you got questions, you have one.
Yeah.
Do you want to say a bit closer?
I heard James before. Oh my gosh. I guess with the shift, I feel like we're seeing globally a little bit towards more sustainable capitalism to some degree. You mentioned earlier on the sole purpose of the startup being to make as much money as possible for whoever is involved. I guess I was just wondering if you view there possibly being a shift of that sustainable kind of ecosystem towards what VCs or just investors are looking for in a startup, whether or not they have that kind of forethought going into it with the change that we're seeing in business, or if you really still do believe the likes of governance early on slow it down, I guess.
Yeah, really, really interesting question. And another one that we could probably talk for an hour about that one. But it's, I think I would love it if there was more focus in that area, I guess, about a more sustainable form of investing. I believe the VC machine is broken. Like, I don't think it's sustainable. I do think we're in a bubble. I think it's starting to correct at the moment. I don't know if you see what's happening in the markets at the moment, but it's a bit scary. I think, that there's no way that, like, all capitalism is essentially a Ponzi scheme, right? You're always resting on trust. It's layers of trust. And as soon as the trust breaks, it all disappears. And I think the way that VCs work, where particularly the angel style, right, where you invest in 20 companies, fully expecting 19 of them to fail, but the one of them to deliver extraordinary returns, and that makes up for all the rest 10 times over. And that model to me seems inhumane, because the other 19 companies had customers, and they had investors who were individual investors in those companies, and they had employees, and that value of that evaporates. And I think I don't think that's an ethical thing to do. I think there is a movement towards ethical investing, but it's still a very small portion of that machine. And to me, the thing that we can all do, and perhaps even in New Zealand, like thinking about the distinctive qualities of being a New Zealander and what it is to live here, that kind of bootstrapping approach, I reckon, is a lot closer to our hearts, and it's a way of building profitable companies more slowly, but in a more sustainable way. But yeah, I think there is a growing sense of you've got the sort of the social venture movement and the idea of ethical investment, and there's certainly a slow, I'd call it a reluctant move in institutional investing towards treating social environmental issues as part of governance. But that's more of a reaction to not wanting to be regulated by governments. It's not because they want to. But in the end, the driver is still to get the biggest return possible, to get a premium above and beyond what you can get by investing in more ordinary sorts of things. And so as long as that machine keeps being fed and those extraordinary returns keep being generated, people are going to keep doing it. That's how we work. It's a bit like what James was saying with the crypto bubble, right? It's that speculation. It's the same as the housing market in New Zealand. It's very hard to, once those opportunities are created, the freeloaders and the get rich quick people just descend on them. I hope that's not too cynical. Sorry. You're muted, Roy.
Sorry guys, we're on mute, but that's all good. You didn't miss out much, we're just talking about pizzas. All right. Oh, maybe I'll explain. So we've got this 1 minute video, okay?
Hey, just before you do that, Roy, sorry, I'm going to have to jump. I've got to get to another meeting.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks, Gareth. Appreciate it. See you later.
Yeah, thank you all.